Hello and welcome to July's movie recap. I'm a little bit late because my family and I were on vacation, but let's get into it. Grab yourself a cozy drink, snuggle up with a blanket, and let's jump into this month's watch list. First up from last month is a classic from 2001. I watched this on Pluto TV, and it is Joyride. I would categorize this movie as more thriller, less horror, but it's still a fun movie. It was a fun movie back in 2001. It's absolutely 2001, early 2000 vibes. The movie starts out with two brothers that are driving across country to pick up the one brother's female friend, from college before they all head home. They have an old CB radio in the car that's used to talk to truckers, that truckers use to communicate with each other. And they are bored. And so the one brother eggs the other one on to start talking to this trucker and pretending that he is a female. Pretty much, they play this joke on the trucker, acting like they are a female and like, yeah, come to this hotel, meet me here. I'd love to meet you. And they basically messed with the wrong trucker. And so he starts stalking them, follows them, wants to eliminate them. Anyway, it's a good, fun watch. It's nothing that's like earth shattering cinema. I do remember watching it in the theaters when it came out, and it was like, wow, like such a good movie then. It's definitely a little more cheesy based on today's standards, but still a pretty fun watch. The next movie I watched was Yellow Brick Road. I had never heard of this movie. I'd never seen it, but it showed up on my recommended watches, and so the premise of it sounded intriguing enough that I decided to watch it. It's basically a group of people getting together to go to this town where hikers have gone missing on this trail, and there's just a lot of mystery surrounding this hiking trail that nobody goes onto in this town. They go there and they have the idea to document it, walk this trail, hike it, and see if they can find out, what happened to these missing hikers. And then it gets weird. And I don't know if it's weird in a good way. There were weird scene jumps, which made me kind of feel like I was missing something or missing part of the story. And I think that maybe the scene jumps were kind of trying to confuse us to kind of put us into the mindset of the hikers, and the filmmakers, of them starting to get confused and maybe missing time. There were a couple scenes that were supposed to be creepy and really like, oh my God moments, but honestly, I laughed. And I'm not somebody that normally laughs at like violence and stuff in movies, even if it's done really in a poor, cheesy way. But I laughed at this one scene that was supposed to be pretty dramatic and like, holy crap, I laughed. Now, the movie, I guess, did keep my curiosity going long enough to finish the movie, but I did find myself throughout the entire movie, I kept checking to see how much longer there was. And I kept thinking like maybe it's going to get better. It did not. There were holes in the plot. The end doesn't really answer any questions. I just am kind of mad that I wasted my time watching this one. The next movie I watched with my cousins because none of them had ever seen it, and this is a cult classic. It is Sleepaway Camp. This is full on cheesy 80s goodness, and cheesy in the best way. It's absolutely cheesy. Cheesy 80s horror in such a good way. See, the last movie, The Yellow Brick Road, was cheesy and it wasn't a good cheesy. Sleepaway Camp, if you don't know, centers around a summer camp and kids start getting taken out. And who is the one doing it? I don't know. I like this movie because the special effects makeup, the practical makeup, is decent enough. And my cousins all thought the movie was pretty terrible and boring. I love it. I don't know if it's because I grew up watching this movie, but the ending, I'm not going to give it away, but the ending makes it all worth it, I think. Next movie is The Orphanage. This is a Guillermo del Toro movie, and it is in Spanish with subtitles. I think there may be an English dubbed version, but I always think it's better to listen to it in the original language and just read the English subtitles. This is one of those movies that for me had all of the elements of something that I should like. It kind of had a slow burn, which I don't mind as long as it's interesting. It had a ghost story, creepy little children, but it just missed the mark for me. I honestly was a little bored. The ending was okay, but pretty much this movie is about a woman who is trying to open up this orphanage for children with special needs. But there is some history involved in this home, and an angry ghost, and I'll just leave it at that. I didn't regret watching the movie, but I would not be watching it again. The next movie is Jezebel, not Jezebel, Jezebel. This is from 2014. It's got tarot, it's got voodoo, it's got mystery, it's got ghosts. If you're a fan of movies like The Skeleton Key, you will probably enjoy this movie, or at least the feel of this movie. It wasn't bad. It kept my attention. I kept watching it. It was not one of the movies where I felt like I had to keep watching to see like, okay, how much longer, looking at my clock. I didn't want to pick up my phone. So it did keep my attention, but it was kind of cheesy. There were definitely some holes in the story, and the ending was a little goofy. All in all, though, not a bad movie, and especially if you are looking for those more like Southern Gothic, Skeleton Key type movies, you'll like this one. Next movie I watched is based off of an extremely popular horror novel, My Best Friend's Exorcism. I actually started reading My Best Friend's Exorcism and was not enjoying it, and I texted my cousin and I was like, hey, have you read this book? Does it get any better? And she was like, it does not. And I was like, I really wanted to like this book. I feel like it would have made a better movie than a book. And she was like, it actually was a movie or is a movie. I'm like, are you kidding me? So we watched it. The story is about, it kind of follows two best friends and then a couple of their other friends. And one of the girls gets possessed. And that's the whole story. The good news is it's just as cheesy as the book. Maybe that's bad news, good news. It takes place in the 80s in the South. And so it is fun kind of having that 80s feel, that 80s vibe, a little throwback. It feels like the movie Mean Girls, but set in the 80s and involving an exorcism. Or it's like if Nickelodeon and Disney paired up and made a movie about a girl being possessed. Like that's the feel of it. Super cheesy, super goofy. I don't know. I mean, I guess if you want to watch an exorcism movie and you really want some 80s vibes, watch it. But otherwise, I didn't like it. All right. You're probably like, oh my God, were there any good movies that you watched this month? And yes, there was. The movie X. I finally watched the movie X. Loved it. Loved it. So first of all, it had just the like gritty summer sweaty aesthetic, and I love it. 1970s, perfect. Nailed it. Nailed the vibe. Texas Chainsaw Massacre type vibes, that whole aesthetic, that whole energy. So if you like that movie, you'll probably like this one. A group of people get together they stay at this little cabin on this old family or this old couple's property. And they are filming an adult movie. The older couple does not know that they're filming this movie, but that is what they are doing. And then things go wrong and bad and bloody. This movie was beautifully shot, and there was some amazing lighting. Like there were some shots that were, framed and lit up, and that were just honestly, even if it was like a creepy moment, were just really beautiful, or even like a really unsettling moment. Just the angles and the lighting and the aesthetic and everything was just like wow. Like, there were several moments throughout the film that I audibly said, "Oh my God!" Like I was sufficiently disturbed and uncomfortable in several scenes in the best way or worst way, best way, worst way. Yeah. It may not be as fast paced of a slasher as some people may like. Some people may want kind of like the action right out the gate. And this one, it takes a little bit to get to kind of like the action. But even though there isn't like the slasher stuff happening in the first parts of the film, it's a great movie. I could see me watching this maybe every summer, because it's one of those. I watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre frequently as well, kind of these summer vibes, and this was an excellent one. Another movie that chef's kiss that I loved, and I saw it in theaters, and this movie seems like it's half and half. People are either loving it or they're hating it, and that is Long Legs. I can't say enough good things about this movie. Again, the way it was shot, the lighting, the framing, the vibe, the sound, which I learned that some of the music and the background sound for this movie, they did if you've ever heard of like the Beatles were famous for supposedly doing this, where if you play a record backwards, you hear like a hidden message. So they literally recorded demonic incantations and then played them backwards, and they inserted that into the film for some of the background sound, which to me is super creepy. If you are a fan of The Silence of the Lambs, you will love this movie as well. It kind of has that same feel. It takes place in the 90s and it follows a new FBI agent, and she is on this case that gets really weird and a little demonic, and it's just amazing. As somebody who does know about some spirituality and occultism, there were so many like symbols and things throughout this movie that if you kind of pay attention to these things or have an awareness of these things, you'll notice little like symbolism and symbols and things like that throughout the movie, which I think makes it a lot more fun. This movie, I think maybe why some people don't like it is because it's not jump scare scary. It's not overly like in your face, spoon feeding you the scary. It's more of a psychological, just unsettling. Like I didn't feel scared per se as like, oh no, like somebody's going to jump out and stab me and oh, jump scares galore. Instead, this movie gives you just such an unsettled feeling throughout the entire thing. The dark aesthetic, the coloring, the just the whole thing, it just leaves you feeling like, ugh. And there were a couple scenes too, which I guess some people thought were funny, which could be depending on how you're looking at it. But also at the same time, it's just kind of like, oh, like why is he acting like that? Like, I don't know. The whole thing was just like psychologically and energetically unsettling. And to me, that is so much more of a scary movie than just the constant jump scares and slasher stuff. Like, that's not what freaks me out. Those are fun, but the unsettled, like the movies where you go home and you turn off your lights and you're laying in bed and you picture these scenes that you just saw, or just you still have that feeling, that's creepy. I'm definitely going to be watching that movie again. I feel, especially too, now that I know the story and I know everything that happens, looking back at the movie, like, or rewatching the movie, I'll probably be able to even put more kind of like correlations together. I think it's an excellent movie. Absolutely watch it. And finally, the last movie I watched for July was the movie Final Girls. This was a 2015 film. It follows Max, the main character, and Max's mom was an actress, and she was in a film in the 1970s that was a cult classic. Kind of reminded me of a sleepaway camp type movie. The movie follows Max and her friends as they go to the movie theater to watch the movie. It's one of the anniversaries of the film. I'm going to not give details, but stuff happens. And next thing you know, Max and her friends end up in the movie. And they pretty much kind of have to figure out, like, how the hell can we get out of this movie now? And so they interact with the actors, the characters from the film. And yeah, they have to figure out how can we get out of this movie. This movie is cheesy, but it is cheesy in the best way. And it knows that it's cheesy. It lightheartedly pokes at tropes from horror movies, especially 80s horror. It's basically cheesy done well. It's cheesy that knows it's cheesy and it fully leans into it, and it absolutely works. I really enjoyed the vivid colors and the lighting throughout this film, and I thoroughly enjoyed this movie, and I do think that I'm going to be putting this onto my annual summer horror movie list to watch. It's not so much horror, because it is so campy and almost like lighthearted, but it is still also a slasher. But it's so good. And there you have it. That sums up my horror movie watch list from July. Let me know if you have watched any of these movies. Do any of them sound interesting to you? I would love to hear your thoughts. All right, bye bye.